Hello, and welcome to The Connection. This podcast is about understanding and building the connection we have with others and with ourselves. I hope that through this podcast, you'll be able to have more joy and fulfillment in your life. I'm your host, Jared Hurst. So last week, if you'll remember, I was talking with you a little bit about resiliency. The reason that I was speaking with you about resiliency is because I had some challenges come up in my life. Things had been going incredibly well for a period of time, and as typically happens when things go well, eventually a challenge comes along. I had a number of challenges that came into my life. Some of them resolved the way I wanted them to. Some of them have yet to resolve, and some of them didn't work out the way I hoped. But that's life. The challenges that come into our life are there for a purpose, or we can choose to have them be there for a purpose. We always get to decide how we want to react to the events of our life. One of the things that I've focused on, one of the things that I've learned over the course of the last week as I've been dealing with these challenges and I've chosen to be resilient, is this concept of starting over. It just kind of fell into my lap. A friend of mine sent me a podcast episode from School of Greatness. Now, School of Greatness is a podcast by Lewis Howes. He is somebody that used to be a professional athlete and ended up getting injured and started, I believe he wrote a book, and he's got his podcast, and he's a speaker and everything like that. I haven't really listened to his podcast before. This was the first episode I'd ever listened to. But I'm familiar with Lewis because I've seen many Instagram clips of him speaking and interviewing people. So I was already a really big fan. It was really awesome to be able to listen to one of his episodes and kind of get a feel for what he talks about on his podcast. In this podcast episode, he interviewed a man by the name of Michael Rubin. Now, I wasn't familiar with Michael. I don't know if you are, but in case you're not, I want to tell you a little bit about what happened during this podcast episode, because there's an incredible lesson that I feel I learned from this episode. I'm going to share with you a couple of numbers, sharing with you a little bit about Michael's story. Some of those numbers may not be exactly right. I might be off by a little bit, but they're all really close. I'm pretty sure I got them all right, but I didn't want to spend hours going back through the episode and making sure I had everything exactly perfect. The point is these numbers are close enough that they'll get you the gist of Michael's journey. So Michael Rubin, at the age of 14, decided to open a ski business where my understanding, he rented out ski equipment. He did incredibly well for a number of years and then had basically a catastrophe where there was a terrible winter, there wasn't any snow, and it just killed his business. And it sounds like it killed a lot of people's businesses. He, if I understand correctly, had $200,000 in debt at 16 years old and $80,000 worth of inventory. So massive problem, right? What ended up happening is all of these people that he owed debts to started suing him. And so he said that every morning before he'd go to school, the sheriff would show up and give him all of the lawsuits for the day. Like, it was like, hey, Michael, here's today's lawsuits. Crazy. I can't imagine being 16 years old. Just the stress of learning where I belong in the world and doing school and friends and everything else, I can't imagine taking on all the responsibility of being an owner and then having all these people come and basically suing you for a lot of money. Well, what ended up happening is over the course of this, he ended up settling all of his debts for $38,000. He didn't have the money, so he borrowed that money from his parents with the stipulation that if he borrowed the money, he would go to college. Well, his mind just works completely different than I think most people. What happened is a competitor of his, or like another retailer in the industry, they ended up also having financial problems. And Michael ended up going to a government auction and bought $200,000 worth of equipment for $13,000. Well, he committed to buying that. He goes to his parents and said, "Hey, I know I just borrowed $38,000 from you, but I need to borrow another $13,000. His parents were like, "You're nuts. We're not doing this." No. Well, Michael said, "I committed to this. I have to do this. I'm going to get, sued or go to jail or something like that." I'm not quite sure what the ramifications were, but he decided that what he was going to do is he was going to find a way to make this happen because he saw this as an opportunity. So he went out, he knocked doors until he found somebody to lend him the money, and they lent him the $13,000 on $1,000 per week interest. That's not a great loan, right? So $1,000 in interest per week on this $13,000 that he was borrowing. He did this. He goes out, buys a $200,000 worth of equipment, and then he spent the next 3 to 4 weeks calling around to retailers and selling off the equipment that he'd just bought until he raised $17,000 in about a 4-week period. Took that $17,000, paid back his loan to this man, and still had 80 to 90% of his inventory left over. Then he turned that into a business, and I believe he was the largest reseller of sports equipment in the world by the age of 21. I want to say he was making around $100 million a year with his business. Well, that alone is incredible. Then during the course of this podcast, they started talking about other times that he'd struggled, and there was one other point in his life where he had $250 million in stock. It was like 2008 time when the financial crisis hit. He ended up having the value of his stock drop to about $25 million. So from 250 to 25. And he had $50 million in debt that started getting called due. So he did everything he could to pay off this $50 million in debt. He got to the point where he had $3 million left. And he couldn't pay it off. They were basically saying that they were going to kick him out of his own company, and he was going to basically lose everything after having $250 million in stock 3 months earlier. Well, apparently he had loaned $3 million out to some type of an investor or something like that to help them jumpstart their business. And so he goes to this company and says, "I need my $3 million back." And they're like, "No, we're not going to do it." So Michael goes around and he's doing all this work trying to find a way to make this $3 million happen. But at the same time, he's constantly calling this investor over and over and over and over again. He said that after about 50 phone calls, he finally gets the guy to agree to give him back his money if he never talks to him again. Kind of crazy, right? So here's the point of all this. This is why I'm telling you about this experience and this man. What stuck to me is there's one point after telling all of this to Lewis where Lewis asks him, basically says, like, "What's your mindset around failure and, challenges and whatnot?" And Michael says something to the extent, this might not be word for word, but it's pretty close. He says, "Maybe I'll go bankrupt and get sued. Whatever. I'm an idiot. Who cares?" Maybe I'll go bankrupt and get sued. Whatever. I'm an idiot. Who cares? Like, think about that. Think about that mindset. This idea of basically just being willing to have everything fall apart on you, and it's like, whatever. At one point over the course of this 1 hour long podcast, Michael said that one of his favorite questions to ask people is, if you could give up everything that you have to be 10 years younger, would you? And Michael says the answer for him is definitely yes. There's no question that he feels he could easily earn back all the money that he currently has So it would be worth him to have an extra 10 years on this planet, because he could turn that into the money that he currently has, plus he'll get the extra 10 years worth of life and experiences and everything else. Like, there's no question to him that he would make that trade. That is an incredible mindset. Just this belief in yourself that no matter what happens, no matter what falls apart, no matter if I start over completely from zero, I can make everything happen if I want to. So there's a couple of things that I learned from this that I feel relate to resiliency. And that's why my topic today is about starting over. And what I learned as I looked at Michael's life and I looked at other people who I've found inspiring is the most successful people are willing to risk everything, have it all fall apart, and then trust in their ability to learn, adapt, and know that it doesn't matter what other people think of them or how miraculous the failure they have, because they can pick themselves up and start over. I think there's two key concepts there that just really stand out to me. This willingness to start over and this just not caring what other people think of them. It's like, I don't care if people think I'm an idiot. I don't care if people think I'm a failure. I don't care if people think that I'm living my life the incorrect way. What matters is how I view myself, and knowing that no matter what happens, I can figure things out. I think that is one of the main reasons why failure is so challenging to people. Because when we look at worst case scenarios, we look at the idea of being sued, going bankrupt, having everybody think we're a moron, judging us, whatever. We look at that and we say, that's unacceptable. Like, I'm not willing to accept that. But when you look at it, I could tell you 10 people off the top of my head, just off the top of my head, that are uber successful, like multi-millionaires or billionaires, that just off the top of my head either went bankrupt or were in so much debt that they had a negative net worth, or they were a day or a week from having everything taken away from them, and they just kept at it. And they believed in themselves. They had completely unrealistic expectations in themselves. I saw this study recently where over 22 years they studied around 350,000 people. And the scientists that ran this study determined that the two biggest indicators of financial success for these 350,000 people was the ability and willingness to continue to adapt and change to their goal, to making their goal happen, and an unrealistic view in the minds of the scientists of what their potential was. So, unrealistic view of what you're capable of, and then constantly changing and adapting to reach that goal. That was the biggest indicator of financial success. And you look at these people that are super inspiring, that have created these incredible things, people like Michael, and they had completely unrealistic views and just unrelenting drive and motivation to make their dreams happen. I think there's three things in particular that I looked at when I thought about this that really stood out to me. One, we underestimate our ability to recover from setbacks. We think that if we get sued, we go bankrupt, we fail, we get within, whatever happens, that it's going to be the end of everything, that our lives are over. But it's not the reality. The reality is we're way more resilient as humans than we give ourselves credit for. We underestimate our ability to start over and recover from setbacks. The other thing, we give up way too easily in finding solutions to our problems. Like, think about this. Imagine you're 16 years old and you're being sued and you've got $200,000 worth of debt, I would crawl into a corner and cry. I can't imagine going out there and finding a way to get all of my debts down to $38,000 and then borrowing that money from my parents and then having the audacity to go out and buy $200,000 of equipment for $13,000 in the industry that I just failed in, and then knocking doors in order to find somebody to lend me money, and then knocking doors and making calls for 4 weeks in order to sell all that inventory. Would you think of that? Would you make those kind of efforts? I know I sure wouldn't. I wouldn't have made 50 phone calls to get the guy that I lent $3 million to give me the money back. I would think after 5, 6 calls, it's like, okay, it's not happening. I've talked about it before, but the guy that owns Starbucks, I think he got denied 254 times before he got the loan for Starbucks. That's crazy. We give up way too easily on finding solutions or making the dream that we have a reality. That's what I've learned. And then the last thing is trials and challenges don't ever go away. Just accept that trials and challenges are part of your life. I think one of the places where we get in trouble as people is setting the wrong type of expectations. As I just mentioned, I think it's important to set unrealistic expectations as far as what we can accomplish. But I also think sometimes we set unrealistic expectations for ourselves in the form of what we think we should feel, what kind of trials we should have, how difficult life is going to be. I think when we set these expectations that life is meant to be easy, that at some point all of our challenges are going to go away, that the goal is to reach some financial threshold and then never work again and never have difficulties. It's just not accurate. It's not real. You look at all those people that are uber successful and they have challenges. Their challenges are just way bigger than our challenges. They have to find a way to come up with $50 million of debt to be paid off after losing $225 million worth of stock value out of their portfolio. They find a way to fix their company after they've been told that they needed to declare bankruptcy. They have problems. Money does not make your problems go away. I've often heard it said by a number of different individuals, Michael included on this podcast, that money is simply an amplifier. It amplifies whatever it is that you're doing in life, whatever it is that you're feeling. Sure, it gives you new opportunities and access to things that you don't have access to otherwise, but it is not a problem solver. It does not fix everything. So that's what I learned from this. We underestimate our ability to recover from setbacks and start over. We give up way too easy in finding a solution. And we need to come to terms with the fact that challenges and trials don't go away and they're part of life. I feel like there's some powerful lessons there. And I hope that as you hear those, you can see where you can start making changes to your mindset. Start making changes to the way that you live your life. Because you are capable of so much more than what you give yourself credit for. And that doesn't mean that you need to go live some crazy lifestyle. What it means is you should not allow the limitations that other people set on you to determine what you want in life and determine what you're capable of. You should decide what it is that you really want and then go after it with reckless abandon. If that's being an incredible mom, if that means being a financial expert, that means being a podcaster, if that means going out and discovering the cure for cancer, whatever it is that you feel called to, go do it, and don't let others tell you what you can do. Thank you for spending the time with me today, talking about this, talking about starting over, talking about how we can be more resilient. I believe in you. I know you can do it. Until next week, remember that you are not alone.